Good evening, everyone. Back for another night of reading with Mr. Martin. We'll give everybody a minute or two and then we'll get started. It has been, without a doubt, a nice sunny day today. Well, at least the second half of the day was very sunny, but it has become incredibly windy here. So if every once in a while you hear some odd noises, that might be what it is. The wind has really been whipping. Hopefully out in Rotterdam, it's not as bad. So last night, excuse me, last night, Adam started to really get a bad taste for war. He had met up with his cousin. He had split from Solomon Chandler, which was the very tall older man he had met while he was running away from the two redcoats. Excuse me. And last night he started to see that war wasn't necessarily, I guess we could say, just about killing the enemy. He started to see that some of the men were enjoying it. And he was kind of asking his cousin, right, cousin Simmons, like, when is this going to end? What's the deal? And cousin Simmons kind of pressed on and said, we got to do this. It started, it's there. Your dad's dead. We got to keep this going. And Adam, I don't think Adam really necessarily agrees with cousin Simmons, but he's still in it and they're still moving forward. And sorry, I gotta grab my bookmark. And that's where we're gonna pick up from, excuse me. We paused for a few minutes to rest ourselves on a little bare hillock we called the Indian burial ground. Although, so far as I knew, no one had been buried there. My father once told me that the Indians, being heathens, did not properly bury their dead, but built a sort of frame structure on the burying ground, laid their dead upon it, opened and uncovered to the sun and the rain and the snow. I had liked the notion and half regretted that I was not born an Indian, for it seemed infinitely preferable to being lowered into a deep wet hole in the ground. Now the thought came back to me, a stabbing awakening of grief and remorse, the guilt attached to the way I had allowed myself to be flung into the battle and absorbed by it. With my father lying in our home, hardly even cold with death. I felt that the least I could do for him was to keep my thoughts on him and to keep my sorrow alive. I felt even worse when someone shouted that Lexington was burning. There were well over 150 men in our little army by now, and we all stood dumbfounded and helpless on the little hillock. staring northward where the smoke rose to the sky. We discovered subsequently that only 3 houses had been set on fire and actually burned down: the Loring House, the Mulligan House, and the Bond House. But from the amount of smoke in the sky, it appeared to us, excuse me, then that the entire village was being consumed. I was sick at heart with the thought that our house was burning, and that there was, excuse me, nothing at all that I could do about it. I was asking myself, what about Mother and Granny and Levi? Where were they? Were they in the house? For all I knew, they could be hiding down in the cellar, trapped there, with the house burning down over their heads. I said as much to Cousin Simmons, whose own face was desolate enough. "Oh no, Adam," he said. He replied sadly. "That's one thing you don't have to worry about. Your grandmother would not hide in the cellar if all the dragons in England were in her front yard. It's Ruthie and Goody Simmons I'm distressed about. It's a bitter thing for a man to have to stand idle and helpless and watch his home being consumed into ashes." Some of the men began to talk of going up and attacking the British and driving them out of the town. It was wild, desperate talk. We had inflicted enough damage upon the redcoats and would do more before the day was over, but not by going up against their volleys of their muskets. When they could all stand in their lines and together and see what they were shooting happened too quickly. I could see then that the men were driving themselves sick with their frustration. Such a crowd of us was standing there on the hillock and not being able to do one blessed thing to rescue the town from the redcoats. Then Solomon Chandler sang out, so that everyone could hear him. "One thing, lads, the British are there now, but not for long. The last of them will be out before the hour's up." "Why?" "Because it makes sense. Either they're back in Boston by darkness, or they'll be back there again. Or they'll never be back there again." The men let out a cheer to that. Everyone wanted to find a reason to extract a crumb of comfort, and just then 3 committee men on horseback came riding up. They had a force of 100 men from Watertown and Cambridge, and they were waiting down along the Menotomy Road, just about a mile from where we were. They told us that a relief army of redcoats from Boston, 1,500 of them, had gone by about an hour ago into Lexington, and that before another hour was up, they'd probably be marching down the road and back towards Boston. They were out to find everyone they could, so that the redcoats would retain a good and substantial memory of the Menotomy Road. "And you found us, you did," Solomon Chandler grinned. They broke the tension. Everyone began to talk and shout and swear and wave their guns. It was a wild mood that took hold of the men, as if they realized, as Cousin Simmons had put it, that there was no more undoing of what we had done. Solomon Chandler climbed onto his horse and shouted, "Follow me, laddies." Then we all streamed after him, down off the hillock and towards the Menotomy Road. I didn't want to go, yet I went. We all went. We were in the grip of a force outside of ourselves. I know that my heart was breaking with anxiety over the burning of the village, and I tried to give myself enough strength and purpose by telling myself that everything I had ever loved was destroyed or dead, and I might as well be dead too. There was a place our people had in mind where the Menotomy Road dips between 2 banks of earth, with a great tangle of wild blackberry bushes on one side and a windfall of dead trees on the other. I knew the place well because the bramble patch, because the bramble patch made for the best rabbit hunting in the whole neighborhood. And many was the time Father and I hiked down from there and early morning shooting. Now the plan was to drag enough fallen trees across the road to block it, then back the trees up with rocks and dirt. With such a breastwork, we felt we could hold the British long enough for a considerable army of Essex men who were said to be marching in under the leadership of Colonel Pickening. I suppose that there were some vague possibility that the plan might have worked. In any case, it was only a plan of any sort that emerged from that incredible and catch-as-catch-can day of battle. Everything else that happened was the result of some sudden notion of that committee man. And the only reason that the battle went an hour after hour was that no one was in any position to halt it or direct it. It was perfectly true that before the reinforcements reached the First Redcoat Army, they wanted to surrender. They were just about going out of their minds, plagued by an enemy they couldn't see, unable to use their tactics of battle that they had learned or practiced in Europe, shooting away all their ammunition at stone walls, woods, thickets, and losing almost a quarter of their number to dead or wounded. But there was no one they could surrender to, no one they could talk or to parley with. And when one of them came to the roadside west of Lexington with a white flag, he was shot dead by Abraham Clyde of Concord, who thought the white flag was only another one of the various regimental flags the Redcoats carried. So our plan might have worked, and everything that followed might have been different if the British hadn't already started down the Monotony Road and reached it before we did. We were still a quarter of a mile away when we heard the Watertown and Cambridge men banging away at them. Cousin Simmons and I and 4 or 5 of the others crawled to the windfall and wiggled our way through a tangle of trees until we got a view of a few yards of the road. We were all hidden there as a fox in her earth, about 60 or 70 paces from the road, and we began to shoot at the redcoats passing by. It was a strange and dreamlike business, lying there and seeing bits of red color emerge from the powder and smoke that hung all over the place and all over the road as well, then watching everything disappear under the smoke, and only the smoke to shoot into. And then a bit of red here and a bit of red there, and such a feeling of the world gone mad, for there was nothing the redcoats could do but to march on and accept their measure of death, and the bulk of our committeemen running down the road from place to place, so that they were always with the army, like flies on a dying beast. But we, our little group of people, remained in our cover, for there was no way that the redcoats could reach us. The most of us were too tired now to go on running back and forth along the road. We lay there and fired at the redcoats and the smoke, or at least Cousin Simmons did and the others did. I fired off my fowling piece once, and then I realized that at this range, even if some of the birdshot did hit the redcoats, it would sting no harder than a mosquito. It was a great relief to find some sensible reason not to go on shooting. Excuse me. I am parched. I burrowed into the ground behind a fallen tree, rested my cheek against the stock of my gun, listened to the shooting and the screaming and the cursing, more profanity in 5 minutes than one heard in our village in the course of a year. And then I fell asleep. It might strike you as strange that I could fall asleep right in the midst of a battle, and you might even consider it downright ungracious that anyone should go to sleep during a battle as talked about and lied about and written about as this one. But the fact of the matter was that I had gone without a night's sleep and been through the massacre on the Common. I had quartered back and forth across the country since then like a fox driven to distraction, so that the wonder of it was, not that I had finally fallen asleep, but that I had managed to remain awake as long as I did. I was awakened by the silence. I guess it was the first silence in 6 or 7 hours. And it was just unbelievable and a little frightening as well. I didn't mean that it was a complete and total silence or anything unnatural or spooky. There were sounds in the distance and the background, as there always are, but even these sounds were muffled by the tangled pile of trees, and missing were the violent and awful sounds of battle, the crash of firearms, and the savage shouting and swearing of men in anger and pain. When I listened more carefully, I thought I could still hear battle sounds, very faint, but far off. It was still daylight outside, but under the windfall was a sort of comforting twilight. And being used to gauging time without a pocket watch, I had the feeling that at least an hour had passed. I lay still for a while after I awakened, in peace, And then I heard the noise of twigs and branches breaking, men making their way into the windfall, and voices. First, I heard the voice of the Reverend. God be kind to us, Joseph, and merciful. I tell you frankly, I don't have the courage to go back to Goody Cooper and tell her that her son, as well as her husband, lies dead today. What about myself? Cousin Simmons answered. Aside from having the boy's blood on my own conscience, I'll have to face her. Why didn't you send him home? She'll ask me. The boy's blood isn't on your conscience, Joseph. No man's blood is on anyone's conscience today. Conscious today, excuse me, unless it be the conscience of the Englishman who made the first slaughter on the common. You don't know Goody Cooper, Reverend. Where did you see him last? Where did you leave him? Trouble is, Reverend, I don't think I ever knew a better or more uncomplaining boy. He was a good boy, Joseph. No question about that. It just shakes my faith in the Almighty to think of an innocent cut down like this. Nothing could shake your faith, Joseph. His ways are inscrutable. Uncomplaining, Reverend, when you can consider that all that boy went through just since last night. At first, it was pleasant and rewarding to lie there and listen to them talk about me in the past tense. I guess there never was a boy who didn't imagine himself dead, so that he could take comfort out of the fine things said about him. But there was a tone in their voices that made me wonder whether they had the same respect for my intelligence as for my forbearance. I sat up and I called out to them. God be praised, the Reverend cried. Helping to my feet, Cousin Simmons asked if I was wounded. No, sir, I'm all right. Then what on earth happened to you, Adam? I fell asleep. The both of them stared at me open-mouthed. You what? I fell asleep, I repeated. I just fell asleep. So long as you're all right, the Reverend said. They helped me out of the windfall, and I asked Cousin Simmons about the battle. It's down past Cambridge by now, and the committee men are marching in from all over. If the Redcoats go back to Boston, they're there to stay. There'll be 5,000 of our men around Boston by nightfall. Then can we go home, I asked. We're all going home, Adam. There's others had more sleep and more rest. But what I could, but what I could be coming home to, I didn't know. And for all I knew, the town could be in ashes and everyone dear to me dead. When I saw the tower of the meeting house, I felt better. And I saw the Parker barns on the outskirts of town. I told myself if they had burned one, they might have burned the other two. You might think we would run in our haste to be there and see what happened, but you don't hurry for bad news. Also, we were tired, all three of us, so we came up on the town slowly, and bit by bit we realized that it still stood. Only 3 houses that I spoke of were burned down. I left Cousin Simmons and the Reverend to go to my own house. We were not the only ones returning to the village. Others came across the fields, and still others were trudging wearily up the monotony road. And all of them can be defined by the sort of tired sadness that was evident in the way they walked and the way they trailed. We had won the battle, but there is less joy in winning a battle than the history books tell you. Best to go home, Adam, the Reverend said. I will come by and I will pay my respects later. I would have begged them to come along with me and not leave me with the task of facing what awaited me at home. But when I looked at them, I had no heart to. Both of them had aged woefully. Their faces were gray and drawn, covered with a stubble of beard, with dirt and grime and dried blood. Their clothes were torn and filthy, and their eyes were red with fatigue and gunpowder. I felt that I must present as dreadful an appearance, but I was younger than they were, and nothing can feel as superior as youth. So I nodded and I left them, and I walked towards the house, approaching it from the back, where the herb garden was. Levi must have been watching and waiting for me. My own sight was blurred, for the sun was already low and burning into my eyes, and I heard him before I saw him. Adam, 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 he said, shouting. He hurtled towards me and plunged into my arms. and I just let my gun drop and hugged him as if he was everything in the world. He was crying, and I began to cry too. I sat down on the ground, still holding him tight, and did my best to stop the tears. I knew that it would only be moments before I had to face my mother, and I didn't want to be with tears in my eyes. I could imagine that there had been tears enough for that day. We thought you were dead, Levi sobbed. There was a big damn fool from Concord come by here. He said he saw you just lying dead at the crossroads. Do I look dead? Oh, Adam, I don't want you dead. Well, I'm not dead. I'm alive. I may be tired to death, but I'm alive. I don't want you dead, Adam. Stop saying that I'm dead because I'm not dead. I shook him and he looked up at me and managed to smile through his tears. Then I got to my feet, and there, at the edge of the herb garden, Mother was standing with Granny next to her. Granny's arms around her to hold her up, and Mother's face was white. Mother's face was white as snow. Her mouth was open a little and lips trembling. Granny just stared at me, shaking her head slightly. He's not dead, Levi said apologetically. Mother took a few steps towards me. I'm awful dirty, I whispered. I guess I'd never been so dirty in my whole life. Then Mother came up and took me in her arms, holding me so tight I thought my ribs would break. Her face buried in my dirty shirt. Then she let go of me and stepped back and began to cry. Granny went over to her, stroking her shoulder, excuse me, and whispering, poor dear, poor dear. It seemed to me that Granny might have spared a moment for greeting me, but she hardly appeared to know that I was there. Levi picked up my gun, and Granny led Mother back into the house, myself following them. A number of neighbors were in the kitchen or standing outside. Ruth was there, her mother and her widow, Aunt Susan, and old Miss Cartwright, the midwife, who always helped out at funeral occasions. When it comes to laying out and the shrouding, and there were some of Levi's friends, the Albright boys and little Jonah Parker, who had a death in his own family. They made way for me to enter the kitchen. Ruth held back, but never took her eyes off me, and the widow Susan took my arm. Mother dropped into a chair and stared at me, her whole body shivering and the tears running down her cheeks. And Granny's face was all twisted up, with her own attempt to refrain from weeping. Realizing, perhaps, that it would only take a little more to have all those women half hysterical. I had anticipated a bad time of coming home, but I hadn't thought it would be anywhere as heartbreaking and uncomfortable as this. For the life of me, I didn't know what to say, except to tell Goody Simmons and that cousin Simmons was back at home and safe. You go there, Ruthie, she told her daughter, and tell him we're here. Shall I take him upstairs? Mrs. Cartwright asked Mother. Mother didn't respond, but the widow Susan nodded, and Mrs. Cartwright took my hand and led me upstairs and into the main bedroom, where Father's body was laid out on the bed. At first, I was frightened to death and would have given 10 years of my life not to have to go into that room. I held back at the doorway. Miss Cartwright cooed at me. Come now. Nothing to be afraid of. It's birth, marriage, and death. Always been that way and always will. Someday your own children will look at you all stretched out and washed and combed. And how do you suppose they're going to feel? Now come right here, Adam. It was poor consolidation, but at least it turned my mind from fear to reluctance to old, established, and ever-increasing dislike of Miss Cartwright. I was able to assure myself that she was unquestionably the most repulsive and insensitive old lady in Middlesex County. And there was some small comfort. I walked into the room and looked down at Father. Pay your respects, she crackled. Oh, get out of here and leave me alone, Mrs. Cartwright, I snapped at her. What? Well, I do declare, she began, and I interrupted her and told her in no certain terms to get out. Then she left, muttering and coughing with indignation. I was left alone then with my father, who was not my father, but a body, with all that was meaningful and importance gone out of it. It was the ending of the day when I had seen many bodies, bodies of redcoats, bodies of committeemen. All my life long, death had only touched me lightly, but I had lived all day with death today. I was too numb to be moved anymore. I didn't even want to weep. Later and many times afterward, would remember my father, but not the corpse on the bed. I left the room then, closing the door gently behind me. How are we doing on time? We're doing good. When I returned, let me have a quick sip. When I returned to the kitchen, Mother had composed herself, and Granny came over to me. She took my hand and she squeezed it. All the other women had gone. I guess the Simmons women went to meet cousin Joseph, even though he hadn't been killed. He deserved at least an acknowledgement of his return. Mrs. Cartwright must have stalked out in anger. Levi stood in the corner. He couldn't take his eyes off me. You must be hungry, Mother said. I am, but I am dirtier than I am hungry. I just don't believe I'm home without you remarking on it, Mother. I guess it could suffer to be remarked on, Mother nodded, looking at me now the way she normally regarded her son, and not the way you look at someone returned from the dead. I have seen you dirty before, Adam Cooper, but not this dirty. That's your new coat, isn't it? It is. That's right, Mother. How did you tear your shirt that way? Granny asked, crawling on my belly through the windfall. Indians have bellies, Granny said, fighting her own battle with her own torment and fighting it gallantly. But in your family, people have had stomachs for as many generations as we care to contemplate. Yes, ma'am, I nodded. I would have said stomach. It was just it was just the excitement. What excitement? As far as I know, the excitement is over. Where's the Redcoat Army? Back in Boston, the way I hear it. There was a momentary passing glitter in Granny's old eyes, and civilization reasserted itself. Back in Boston, you say? Where we drove them. We drove them out every foot of the way and all the way back to Boston. How many did you kill, Adam? Levi cried. As for you, Mother said to Levi, there's more important things than shouting gibberish like a heathen. Take the pail and bring more water in here. Your brother's going to wash. Levi nodded. He grabbed the pail and he ran out. I felt sorry for him. Not only did he have to bear the death of father, which would weigh more heavily upon him than on me, but he must have experienced his first day of taking the kind of tongue lashing that I considered a normal part of my existence. I want no talk of killing in this house, Mother said to me. The committee will do what it has done, and I am ready to accept that. But I will not have people in my house talking as if we had shed the last vestige of our Christianity and become barbarians. If the Redcoats were defeated, it's because God willed their defeat, and because that awful hand of Jehovah smote them, not because you others were out there behaving as if you had never known the shelter of a decent Christian home. I will have no boasting and bragging over the death of any human being, whether our people or their people, and I will thank you to remember that, Adam Cooper. It relieved me enormously to hear Mother talk that way and in that tone. It meant that she was becoming her old self again, that she would pull herself out of her grief, and that our home would be more than I had hoped for. As for the hand of Jehovah, that was not anything to provoke an argument about, especially since the Reverend was bound to support her. For my part, I was so weary and confused at this point, and my recollection of the day was so chaotic that I was willing to give credit due to anything that had helped us through it. Take off your coat, Mother said. Granny, meanwhile, put wood in the hearth and filled another kettle with water. Mother stared at my shirt helplessly and asked Granny, Is it worth trying to mend it? Shirts don't grow on trees, Sarah, Granny replied. We'll wash it and then we'll see. You can't judge a garment when it's dirty. Then she said to me, There's water heating. Get out of your clothes, boy, and scrub down. Levi will bring you your things. Well, you know what? It's 9:30. We've got about 20 pages left. And I think we're at a pretty good stopping point right there. So leaving off with Adam is home. Granny and mother are taking care of him. They thought he was dead, but no. All this excitement, he just fell asleep in a windfall, right? Like a place where a lot of trees had blown over and fallen over, and it left good. It left good cover for them to do some fighting and hiding, I should say, to do the fighting. Okay, so current events. If you got any questions, if you got any comments, if you just want to throw anything out there, my friends, don't be shy. Throw some info out there and let's talk about it. So, again, I tried to spend a lot of time today. I keep my pad with me, and as I hear news, I write things down, and every day there's a lot of good stuff happening, but I think without a doubt, our lives have just kind of been turned into, one bad news cycle after another. And I was thinking today that, that it's probably, just the way things are going to be for a while, but I do believe that there's going to come a time where it's just going to be a lot of real good news. And we're just going to, excuse me, we're just going to start hearing more and more real good stories. So, don't let this stuff bog you down. We'll get there. We will get there. So why don't we start with our state? Today, there are 92,381 New Yorkers, New York staters that have tested positive. And as of today, 2,373 have died. Now, one thing that I did see, my friends, is that the number of cases in Schenectady is starting to grow. And apparently 5 people died of the coronavirus in Schenectady. So one of the things that's kind of been hitting the news late in the day today, and it was starting to circulate around earlier. If any of you have sewing experience, if you know how to sew, there are a lot of places that are giving away giving out the patterns for you to make homemade masks. So what hit later in the day today is pretty much this. We should not be going outside anymore without wearing some kind of mask. And that's to either keep ourselves from catching coronavirus or from giving it to somebody else. So, our library in Middleburg earlier in the day today got a hold of a couple websites that are posting the plans. So there's a lot of places out there that, and I think I talked to you guys about this the other night, Joann Fabrics is giving away free material if you promise that you're going to make masks. So there are a lot of different plans out there. And I guess what you basically have to do is they're telling you, you can't just take any fabric, but you take, they tell you what types of fabric to get. And I think you're supposed to sandwich a couple layers together. And then, they give you the measurements of what to cut, what to fold, what to sew, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you have any experience at all with that, Google it, because you will find the plans. And I don't think the material is any kind of fancy material that you need. And probably a lot of these materials would be available like at Walmart, or, there are a lot of different places like maybe Michael's Art Store or Joann Fabric. I can't remember the other big fabric store. around here, but there are, there's a number of different places where you can get this. So that's where we're at, I guess. The government is saying, if you're outside, doesn't matter where you are, wear them. That's what they're suggesting. And earlier in the day, Mayor de Blasio down in New York City had already said it. He said it without a doubt. If you're a New Yorker and you're out on the street in New York City, you need to have a mask on. So friends of mine they live in Delaware, and their daughter and granddaughter live in Brooklyn. And what what they did, oh, excuse me, what they did was they literally stockpiled food in their house. They self quarantined for 14 days. Neither one of them had showed any signs, no fever, no nothing. Jumped in the car, took their cats, and they drove down to Delaware, to where our family friends were, because our family friends are in their 70s, so they are in that upper risk group, I guess you could say. So I think there are a lot of good people out there that are social distancing and sticking to it, but there's still too many people that aren't. So I guess across the world, though, there are 1 million coronavirus cases across the world. So we've officially hit that number. What else? Oh, so here's one of the things, we've talked about economic stimulus, either last night or was it last night or 2 nights ago? We talked about this company over in Rensselaer, Regeneron, and they made 500,000 test kits. And I guess these are the ones that take 7 days, but there's now, or they're close to, creating, and private companies are close to creating, I guess, a kit that I think it's a saliva swab, and you can know in 45 minutes. And there are companies that have developed kits that you're going to be able to do it at home, do the test at home and then mail it in, and then they'll contact you and tell you. But one of the things that the governor said that he wants to do, or he is going to do, is that the gowns, the masks, any type of those medical supplies, if you have a company that you think you could convert what you do to make any of this stuff, the state is going to help you do it. The state is going to bankroll you to do it. So I want to say earlier in the week, it might have been Sunday, I had shared with you that company that makes liquor up in either Queensbury or Glens Falls. They had turned their stills into making hand sanitizer. So, they've already pumped out like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of bottles of hand sanitizer. So the governor is asking, hey, if you have a business, I don't know, if you make, if you make bed sheets, I don't know, if you make drapes, if there's any kind of business that you have where you have people that are sewing things, if you can convert it so that you can make the masks, or you can make, clothing for nurses and medical professionals to wear to help protect them, the state is going to help bankroll you to do it. And they will help convert your medical your factories, and then they'll help you convert it back. So maybe like I don't know if it's the scariest news here, or the news that I think we just don't want to hear necessarily. But if the state does not get more ventilators, at the rate that the cases are growing, in 6 days, we're not going to have enough ventilators. So every day, more ventilators come into the state. They've now created ways that one ventilator can help two patients. They've also now discovered that there are these things called CPAP machines that if you know someone that has sleep apnea, it's a mask that you wear over your face when you sleep and it helps you breathe. Well, there's also a BiPAP machine, which is very similar. Now they've discovered that they can do some retrofitting on these BiPAP machines and they can kind of convert it into being a ventilator. So they're coming up with a lot of different things, and it's not really doom and gloom. Like, in 6 days, the world is going to end here because we're not going to have any ventilators. But it's sometimes necessity really drives and it inspires people, and people are becoming very creative, and they're starting to really think outside the box. And sometimes that's what it is. It's like some people are just pressure players. Some people like to hear or just like that, like, holy cow, I'm in, what are we going to do, oh, wait a minute, I know what we can do. And I was reading last night or this morning, I think it was last night after we went off the air, that there's actually a doctor that's working in a company out here in Schoharie. And apparently, whatever his specialty is, he was like, wait a minute, this coronavirus thing acts like something else. And so he got a hold of some doctors and said, why don't you take this medicine and try to use this medicine to fight the coronavirus? And I didn't read the whole article, but apparently it's this medicine that helps fight cold sores that they're starting to use it, and they're starting to find out that it can kind of like hold things off and keep things in bay. So keep things at bay. So there were a couple articles about it, that this Schoharie doctor had made this kind of breakthrough. So that's pretty cool. So I think we talked about this. I know we talked about this last night. On the state border of Louisiana and Texas, the state troopers are only allowing Texans back into the state from Louisiana. They are not letting Louisianans, is that what you call them? Louisianans? I guess. They're not letting them into Texas because New Orleans has become the new epicenter. It's become the new place where things are just starting to take off. And yesterday alone, there were 2,700 new cases in New Orleans. So things are starting to pick up there. And again, it's a port city. It's a city where cruises and, of course, Mardi Gras was going on. So all of that, very much so, not social distancing, has really caused this to circulate around all those people down there. Well, I can't believe, number one, that I'm going to say this. Somebody had tested positive in a nursing home. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Is that around here, Veronica? I know there's been a lot of heartwarming stories coming out of, coming out on the news about a lot of people, because we have to socially distance, especially from the elderly, especially from people in the nursing homes. There's a lot of really cool, heartwarming stories of people that are taking, making big posters and stuff like that and sticking them on, the windows of their family members. Oh, Kingsway Nursing Home. Okay. So there are a lot of really cool stories like that. I saw one really neat story where a guy had his wife was in the nursing home and she had Alzheimer's. And I guess that they really hadn't. He goes to see her, but I guess it had been a couple years since she really had remembered him. And he went in, and I guess he would always go in and sing to her. And they had a video of him, and the nurses had opened up the window, and he sang to her, and she kind of recognized him and was singing along. So there's a lot of really cool stories. As a matter of fact, there was a really great story today out of Greece, New York, and I don't know where Greece, New York is. Um, I can't remember the name of the elementary school, but apparently, so a first grade teacher is not only teaching from home, but what she's doing is she is every day she has been trying to visit a few of her students, and what they're doing is they are socially distancing, but she's just coming to them and saying hi, and just giving them a little bit of I guess just a little bit of reassurance and another familiar face to be around. You guys probably look at a lot of your teachers today and, oh, Mr. Martin's a pain in the ass and this guy's a pain in the butt and this person, blah, blah, blah. And I hate them all and they make me do this work and da, 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 da. But, there was a time where you liked your teachers and there was a time where you really looked up to your teachers. It's probably been a couple years. Um, but for a first grader to have a teacher come to their house, it's doing a lot of good. So some really cool things that we're starting to see. Well, we've been seeing them. We really have been. So as I've been Google Meeting, let me take a sip here. Let's see some questions. Let's see some comments, guys. Come on, you've been too shy the last few nights. Appropriate comments and questions. So as I've been on Google Meet talking to students, and it's great because some students are showing up to ask about work, and some students are just showing up to talk, and that's great. I'll talk all day. And it's really nice to see how everybody's doing and keep in touch. But I've heard some students talk about work and should I be going to work, and I can't go to work because work can't give me any hours right now. But I've talked to a couple students that work at grocery stores, and I guess that all the Hannaford stores in the Capital District are now putting these like plexiglass little kind of like shields around all of their employees, so that somebody can't cough or whatever on them. And they've done that at the local post office here in Middleburg. And what they're doing is, I guess that when you go to the register or the counter, the butcher, whatever, they've put like a lane in the floor where only one cart can go. And then they've kind of put like marks in the floor so that you're not standing right on top of each other. So they're trying to help out their customers that way, and help them and encourage them to socially distance. But some of these companies are just doing that on their own. But now I heard like today, and I don't know if this was an executive order or it must have been, but a lot of these restaurants, I guess, that aren't or that are still allowing people to come in and sit. Now the governor is saying that they could get up to a $10,000 fine, and that they could lose their liquor license. So, maybe for some restaurants that's not a big deal, but there are quite a few restaurants out there that if they're not allowed to sell liquor, that is a big profit for them. And I think that'll probably send a message. But I know I still keep seeing my friends of mine that live in Albany. They're posting on the Facebook that, this restaurant was open and I saw people sitting down. This restaurant was open and I was seeing people, sit down. So I guess the governor is taking some more action to keep that social distancing and to keep restaurants just letting people get their checkouts. Let me get back to this. Okay, so I can't believe I'm actually going to say this live while people are watching. I am a New York Jets fan, okay, and I dislike more than any other team of any other sport in the world the Patriots. I've always been a Jets fan, but my backup team, oddly enough, was the Patriots. I actually really like them as a team. We won't go into why I don't like them. It does have something to do with their current owner. But I saw that too, Sydney. I saw that too. Yeah, this guy has Bill Lapshees, 104 years old. I saw that. I think, didn't he serve in World War II as well? Yeah, I think he had like the flu. He served in World War II. I think he was wounded in World War II or something like this guy's life. It's like, what the heck? Yeah, yeah. What do we have to get? Kryptonite? This guy is like Superman. It's great. But, anyways, back to that football team that I hate. I don't know if you guys heard this. I think this is a real classy move. The owner of the New England Patriots sent the Patriots private jet to China, and they picked up 1.4 million surgical masks, gowns, other medical stuff. So, and he picked up the expense. So I guess that there is something good that the Patriots can do. And apparently they didn't have to cheat to get to China and back. They did it without cheating. So that was, it might be the first time. That might be the first time they've done something good without cheating. But anyway, we also talked yesterday about this Zandam, which is a Dutch cruise line ship, a cruise ship, and Zandam is one of the ships. And interestingly enough, my friends, the name of the other ship is Rotterdam. The Zandam has been allowed to dock in Florida. So I reported yesterday that I guess the governor was not going to let anybody get off the boat. The governor of Florida was not going to let anybody get off the boat, even though there were 300 Americans on the boat. He was only going to let the Floridians get off the boat. I think that was about 50 of them. But apparently they are starting to take people off the boat. 4 people have died on the boat, and they've left those people. They've left those bodies on the boat. Apparently the boat has a morgue. And over 200 of them out of the 1,200 passengers. So 1,200 passengers, 200 of them are sick. But they are starting to take the most sick off the boat, and they're bringing them directly to hospitals. And right now they're kind of coming up, I guess, with a yep. All right, Christina, hold on one sec. So anyways, they're trying to figure out a way to really get these people safely off the boat. So that's like earlier I talked about this 45-minute test, right? That's what they're really working on. If we can have this test and we can get it to people, we need to try to get it to everybody, right? And then the people take the test, and then we say, listen, you've got it. You got a mild case. This is what we got to do. We got to move you. I think my cat's yelling at me over here. What's the matter? I don't think I'm giving her enough attention. Christina, you have a really good question. And the problem is right now is that nobody really knows. And the governor keeps saying that. The governor keeps saying not only are the model, or not only is the information changing, but the models that they're looking at to really track and predict things, those are changing. So there was a point where it looked like the peak was going to be next week. But now, what he's been saying the past few days is that we might not see the peak for another 3 weeks. They don't really know. Um, but I know this. I did read today that nurses at Ellis Hospital are really starting to say, like, hey, we're running out of supplies. We're bringing in homemade contraptions to try to protect ourselves. What do we do here? And I think that where the real tough call is going to be is now they've started to ship downstate sick people from downstate, meaning from New York City, up to Albany. So was it 14? I think 14 people had been shipped from New York City up. And then they discovered that 45 workers at Albany Medical Center, and this was before the people from downstate got up here, but 45 people at Albany Med were sick. And one of the things that my father had told me was that apparently Albany Med is one of the largest employers directly in the city of Albany. They have over 5,000 employees that work for the hospital. So the fact that 45 of them are sick is I guess it's a small percentage, but when do we get to the point? I think, Christina, like part of what you're bringing up here is when do we say, hey, New York City, sorry, but we can't take your people? When do we say, and that's one of the things that I think the governor has kind of alluded to is the longer that if you get sick and you go onto one of these ventilators, they've kind of discovered that there's a point where, the chance of you living is not very good. If you stay on the ventilator for so many days or whatever, if you get on the ventilator and you come off the ventilator quick, that's a good sign. But if you're on the ventilator and I don't think they've actually mentioned that amount of time, but or how many days that is. But okay, so in U.S. history, we talked about the social contract. We talked about do we have a responsibility as a group to work together and say the survival of the group is more important than the survival of the one or the few, and that's been one of the questions. So do we get to a point where we say, hey, New York, we just can't help you? Or do we get to a point where, we just say, hey, listen, you come in and you're at this point of illness, are you treatable or are you not treatable? Do we give you palliative care or do we really try to stop this? And I hope that we never get to that point. But I certainly think that in places like New York City, and it seems like places like New Orleans, they are going to get to the point where they're going to be so overrun that they're going to be in some pretty desperate times, and that's why a lot of this stuff, like that big boat, the Comfort, the USS Comfort, USNS Comfort, is down in New York City to start taking all of these, all of these people that are the worst cases. And but we'll see. We'll see. I think that we're probably going to know more in the next week or so. It seems like they're really starting to be able to kind of hone in and really be able to look at all the information in the models, and they're doing a little bit better job at predicting. But I would not want to be, the president. I wouldn't want to be the governor. They're making some real tough calls. And I don't know if we talked about it. I talked to, with some of the students today in Google Meet about I wouldn't want to be on the other side of this. So like making the call to close down restaurants and to close barbershops and stuff. I mean, they were tough calls, but relatively speaking, I think those are going to be real easy calls compared to the hey, okay, things are all right, let's get back to normal. That's going to be the call that everybody is going to be afraid to make. And like the governor said today, he said, this could theoretically push into June and July. It could be June or July before we really, really come out of this. And if that's the case, who is going to be the real determining, I guess, level of government? Is it going to be, are we going to just stick to the federal government, or are we going to stick to, what Governor Cuomo says? Because the way it moves, the way that, like the state of Montana only has a couple of cases. So, like, are they ever going to get to where we are? Or are they going to be able to just hold it to, a couple dozen people that get it? I hope that they can. I mean, I hope that we can really contain it where it is, but it's going to be a tough call. It's going to be a tough call coming out of it. And I know, at least Sydney, I know one day you want to be a nurse. This could be something that you're dealing with one day. Other news. I want to make sure I hit everything here. I feel like I forgot something. No, I guess that's everything. All right. So this day in history, this is, I think, our third night of this day in history. Third night. And if you have any questions or comments, guys, don't be afraid to throw them out there. Okay, so when you are a senior and you're in PIG, one of the things that you get to do is you get to do a research project on an important American. And one of my favorite Americans, one of the pioneer women in our country, was a woman by the name of Jeannette Rankin. And I brought up Montana. She actually was from outside of Missoula, Montana. Typically speaking, what are you doing? Oh, she's yelling at me. Sorry. Typically speaking, out west, they were a little bit more progressive when it came to women's rights. And can you guys see her? There she is. She's been yelling at me. So the first woman in Congress, Jeannette Rankin, on this day, she was sworn in 1917. Now, the interesting thing about her is also on this day, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war. However, it wouldn't be for, I believe, 4 more days that the actual declaration of war was passed, and Jeannette Rankin would vote no. So she said that her constituents in Montana would not support the war, and therefore she voted against it. But additionally, she was a pacifist. Now, the interesting thing about her is that on December 8th, 1941, after the day after Pearl Harbor, when we declare war on Japan and on Germany, she also votes no. And as a matter of fact, she is the only person, when we declare war on Germany and Japan, to vote no. That's right. Nurses always have a job, and it's so true. That is right, Sydney. I could never. I hold nurses in such admiration. They are. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. I could not be a elementary school teacher. No way. And I don't think that I could be a nurse. No. If I wasn't a teacher, I think I'd want to be a lawyer. I think I'd want to go to law school. I think I'd want to probably go into government. I don't know that I'd want to practice law, but without a doubt, God bless the nurses. Light a candle for the nurses. So, anyways, Jeannette Rankin sworn in, and the first female to serve in the House of Representatives. On this day, In 1513, Ponce de Leon uh, puts the old Spanish flag down in Florida, right? He declares Florida for the Empire of Spain. Like I said, also, Woodrow Wilson declares or asks for a declaration of war on this day in 1917. Interestingly, World War I, which we just had talked about this week in, or we're talking about this week in um, United States history, on this day in 1918, the Royal Air Force, the Air Force of England, is established. Royal Air Force will become one of the dominant air powers in the world for some time. In 1933, on this date, Germany, under the rule of the Nazi Party, officially broadcasts and begins to openly prosecute, not prosecute, I misspoke, persecute Jews. And last but not least, I thought this was kind of an interesting one. On this day in 1987, the United States Congress passed a law allowing all states to determine what their speed limits would be on their interstates. So I do remember as a young man that around here you could only go 55 miles per hour. That was the maximum speed. And one of the reasons that that was created is, well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, it's not like, Mario Andretti here on, NASCAR, just whipping anywhere and that way on our cars. But cars, when they are going 55 miles per hour, they are working, their engines are working at their optimal capacity, I guess you could say. So they're burning gas the most efficiently when they're traveling at 55 miles per hour. And because we have had problems in our nation's history with gas shortages, setting a speed limit at 55 miles per hour helped us with our gas consumption. But it was on this day in 1987, I guess I was 14 at the time, when Congress said, go ahead, you go ahead, set your speed limits. And most states, I think, have anywhere from a 55 to 65. But there are a few states, like there are parts of, I think, Virginia, North Carolina, Ohio, where the legal limit is up to 70 miles per hour. So there are some states where you can go a little faster. I think I've ever seen a speed limit faster than 70 miles per hour. And that's fast enough. That's just fine. But around here, 88, most of I-87 going up north, you can do 65. I-90, once you get past East Greenbush, you can do 65 miles per hour. So in the more, densely populated areas, more traffic, it's 55 on the highway, but 65 once you get cruising. So another day we made it through, my friends. And we're getting there. We are getting there. April 2nd, 4/2/2020 is in the books. And, we will, one day at a time, we will get through it. The boys and I are playing board games and making dinner together, and we're getting our exercise in the morning. And, I hope you guys are finding a way to keep yourselves going. I know Sydney was telling me today she's reading some good books, and we're reading our book, together every night. So run the marathon. Don't run the sprint. We'll be there. We'll get there. Don't forget, check the morning news on MHS TV. They've been doing a real nice job getting some fresh new stuff out there. They're doing some bold choices and getting some different types of segments out there, which is very cool. And Mr. Chandler and Miss Blinn had some really cool stuff that they threw out there today, which I really thought was kind of heartwarming. Tomorrow, and I'm going to do my best. I can't promise that I can make it, guys, but I'm going to do my best for the car parade tomorrow. I know there's a couple different routes, and I'm going to try to get out there, but it's a little challenging because tomorrow, technically, the grade books close and all that kind of good stuff, and the seniors are working on their research papers and they're working on their presentations. So I'm going to do my best to get out there, and I'll have some Mohan gear on. I'll have my Mohan colors on. And, I know I joke around and I can be a sarcastic SOB sometimes, but I love Mohanison. I have a lot of Mohanison pride, and I have been very fortunate for the past 12 years to work with, some pretty awesome young people. And I'm glad that I still have 18 years left to go. And I hope that, I'm with it for 18 years and that I hang in there. I don't see myself not being able to. But we do have a district that I think comes together nicely when we need to. And I think it is. I think our district has, in the past few years, made some good changes, and we have some new leadership. And it seems like, we're not there. We're not, I think, where we need to be. But, we are Mohan strong, and one day I think we'll be Mohan proud. We're not 100% there yet, but we're definitely getting there. So, anyways, with that, I'm glad to hang with you guys again. I hope I will see you tomorrow night, Friday night. I'll take Saturday off like I did last week. I think I'm just going to keep the Saturdays to me and the boys. And then I'm hoping that we'll finish the book Sunday night. And I know some of you had missed a day or two. No problem. Go back to the channel. They're all dated. Watch them one day at a time, and listen along. And I'm going to download probably the next book I'm going to have to read because I couldn't get it shipped here in enough time. But the next book I'm going to read on my Kindle, which might be a little weird, but whatever. So, but all right, guys, have a great night. I miss you. Jump on, Google Meet, my office hours if you want to hang out. We'll talk about classwork. We'll just talk. We'll do whatever. And I hope to see you guys real soon. Be good and be safe.